welcome to the deep dive. You flagged something really interesting for us, this new executive order from President Trump.
Yeah, it's definitely worth looking at. It's all about government procurement, how the government buys things.
Right, and we want to dive in and really understand what it might actually mean in practice.
Exactly. So it seems to focus on two main things.
Okay.
First, getting agencies to buy more commercial, off-the-shelf software.
Instead of building custom stuff every time.
Precisely. And the second big piece is trying to streamline the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR.
Ah, the FAR. That massive book of rules, right?
That's the one. It governs pretty much all federal buying. Huge document.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this a bit.
Yeah.
The goal here, I guess, is making government buying, well, better, more efficient, less complicated.
That's the idea. Make it more efficient, less bogged down. But, these goals themselves, they're not entirely new. We've heard calls for this kind of thing before.
So this order, it's maybe another chance for some positive change. But it sounds like you're saying we need to be careful.
Yeah, exactly. The potential is there, definitely.
Yeah.
A real transformation, maybe. But only if we actually learn from, how these things have gone in the past. There's a lot of history there.
Okay. So if we want to get a handle on this, where do we start? Like, what makes this time different? Or what are the big potential roadblocks?
Well, a really good place to start, I think, is looking back at something that actually worked pretty well. A past reform effort.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
The Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act, FASA.
Yeah.
It often gets held up as, a success story.
FESA. Okay. And what was the secret sauce there? What made it work?
Well, what's really interesting about FASA, it wasn't just the new rules they wrote. That was part of it, sure.
Yeah, not the whole story.
No. The key thing was the collaboration, how they put it together. You had agencies, Congress, industry people, other experts, all basically sitting down together, talking openly, getting everyone in the room. Yeah, and crucially, it was nonpartisan, completely, that collaborative, non-political approach. It built up a level of trust.
Right. Trust seems vital for something this big.
Absolutely essential. And you can argue that's a big difference from the political climate we often see now around government operations.
It definitely feels different today. How does that sort of politicization actually impact procurement reform?
Well, think about it. For the last maybe 2 decades or so, any kind of mistake in procurement, real or even just perceived, it gets seized on, right?
Becomes a political football.
Exactly. Fuel for bigger debates about government waste or whatever. And in that kind of environment, it's really hard to empower the acquisition workforce.
The people actually doing the buying.
Yeah, they need to feel supported, trusted, seen as part of the solution, not just a potential source of the next embarrassing headline.
That makes a lot of sense. If you're constantly worried about getting blamed, you're probably not going to stick your neck out for innovation or try something new.
Precisely. So without that trust, without empowering those people, any reform effort is fighting an uphill battle from the start.
Okay, so that covers the kind of environment needed. Now let's switch to the other big part of this order, this preference for commercial software. You said that's not new either.
Not at all. Actually, favoring commercial stuff was a core idea behind FASA, too.
Oh, okay.
And it led to the development of FAR Part 12. That's the section of the rules specifically for buying commercial items. It's been part of most big reform ideas since FASA, really.
So the basic thought was stop reinventing the wheel, buy things that already exist if you can.
Pretty much. What was the original thinking behind that shift? Why move away from always commissioning unique government stuff?
Good question.
The vision for FAR Part 12 coming out of FASA was really about creating a public buying system that was, well, less burdensome.
Simple.
Yeah, simpler, but still fair and transparent, of course. A lot of the really complex government-unique rules came from a time when the government, especially, say, the Pentagon, was the main customer for a lot of advanced technology.
Right. They were driving the market back then.
Exactly. So the goal with Part 12 was to make government buying look more like how businesses buy from other businesses, faster, less red tape, more agile.
Okay, a system that mirrors the private sector more closely. That makes sense. But you hinted earlier that FAR Part 12 today maybe isn't quite living up to that original streamlined vision.
Yeah, that's the frustrating part, I guess. It's fascinating, but frustrating. FAR Part 12 has just grown.
Grown how?
Since FASA, something like 150 extra contract clauses have been tacked onto it, added requirements.
Wow, 150.
Yeah, and what's really surprising is that a lot of these additions don't even seem to have a clear basis in any law passed by Congress.
Of just added regulations.
Kind of feels like it. And this accumulation, this bloat, it's pushed FR Part 12 further and further away from that original idea of easy commercial buying.
So that sounds like exactly the kind of thing this new FRR review should be looking at.
Absolutely. That should be a prime target. Getting rid of some of that added complexity that maybe doesn't need to be there.
It's like you said, 150 extra clauses. It sounds like taking a simple recipe and just throwing in tons of extra stuff until it's unrecognizable.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And it highlights this recurring issue we see. When the government has tried other ways to simplify, like these clean sheet approaches.
Like what?
Well, things like the FAA's Blue Ribbon panel years ago, or using other transactions authorities, OTAs, they're these more flexible contracts, often for R&D.
Okay.
The parts of those experiments that actually worked well, they often ended up looking a lot like the original idea of Part 12. Simple, less burdened.
So the simpler approach works, but then
there's this tendency to start layering things back on, adding HAR clauses back in, or sometimes creating new agency-specific rules, non-VAR clauses, that do the same thing.
Which is
Basically scaring off commercial companies, making it too complicated or costly for them to bother selling to the government.
right. What kind of specific requirements tend to be these big roadblocks?
Oh, things like government unique cost accounting standards.
Different from how businesses normally do accounting.
Very different, often. Imagine you're a small software company. You'd potentially have to set up a whole new complex accounting system just to sell maybe a few licenses to one agency. It's a huge barrier to entry.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it's similar with things like intellectual property or technical data rights. The government often has very specific, sometimes arcane ways of handling that, which can clash with how a company normally protects its IP in the commercial market.
Okay, so it's not just about cleaning up the main FIR text itself.
Mm-hmm.
You also have to look at all these extra rules agencies add on top.
Exactly right. And, that brings us to another really critical piece of this whole puzzle, the human element, meaning that fixing the FR or procurement in general isn't just about rewriting rules. It's not just paperwork. It's a really complex organizational challenge. It requires effort across different parts of the government. Contracting folks don't work in isolation.
Right. And you mentioned before there was a lesson from FASA about just making the rules shorter.
Yeah, the big lesson, I think, from the post-FASA experience was that simply cutting down the number of pages in the rule book didn't automatically make buying things easier.
Really? How so?
Well, in some ways, buying commercial items effectively actually requires a different set of skills, a different mindset, maybe a different culture, compared to the old way of doing very specific government-defined contracts.
So it wasn't just less work, it was different work.
Exactly. And looking back, we probably underestimated how much investment was needed in, human capital, training, development for the acquisition workforce to really make that shift to smart commercial buying work smoothly.
So you can change the rules, but you also need to make sure the people implementing them have the right skills, the right support, the right environment.
Precisely. If you want real sustainable change in an organization as huge and complex as the federal government, you need thoughtful strategies for talent management, data-driven strategies.
Not just hoping people figure it out or just cutting staff.
Right. That won't cut it. And, when you think about the timeline mentioned in the order, reviewing the entire FAR and all the agency supplements, potentially in 180 days.
That sounds ambitious.
It underscores just how massive this undertaking really is. It's monumental.
Yeah. It almost makes you wonder how they'd even start tackling something that huge, that complex.
Well, it's actually kind of telling. One of the sources he looked at mentioned that one of the government's very first uses of artificial intelligence way back was actually to help acquisition people just understand the existing rules.
Wow. Using AI to navigate the rule book.
Yeah, to navigate the labyrinth, basically.
That says a lot about the complexity right there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Using cutting-edge tech just to figure out the existing system.
It really does highlight it starkly. But, maybe there's a glimmer of hope there, too, in a weird way.
How so?
Well, if AI can help us understand the sheer complexity of the problem, maybe it can also help identify some solutions as this new reform effort gets going. Could be a tool.
An interesting thought. Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive on the executive order, what are the main takeaways? The big picture.
I think the big picture is that this order, well, it does present another real opportunity, a chance to improve how the government buys things.
The focus on commercial software.
Could mean more efficiency, maybe access to more modern tech. And streamlining the FAR, if done right, could make the whole process less painful, for agencies and for the companies trying to sell to them.
But as we've talked about quite a bit, getting those benefits isn't a given. It's not automatic just because there's an order.
No, definitely not. Success really depends on a few critical things we've touched on.
Like learning from the past.
Exactly. Remembering the collaboration that made FAFSA work. And really trying to get back to the original, simpler intent of commercial buying rules like FAR Part 12 before all the extra stuff got added.
And the people element.
And the people element, crucially. Investing seriously in the acquisition workforce, training, development, and maybe most importantly, fostering a culture where they feel valued and empowered to make smart decisions.
This has been really insightful. It's clear there's so much more to government buying than just, paperwork and contracts.
It's a whole ecosystem.
Yeah. And it really leaves you with something to think about, doesn't it? I mean, for you, our listener, consider this. How does the way the government buys things ultimately influence innovation? Does it help or hinder access to the latest technology? And could this new order, and it's a big if it's implemented thoughtfully, learning those lessons from the past, could it actually shift that landscape in a meaningful way? Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.